mi gente! Know you were looking forward to the second part of this week's series on how to tell a modern African story. As I told you last Tuesday, the first thing that you have to be aware of is that you're telling an African story. I made the mistake of thinking that my education, my upbringing, the fact that I come from a well-to-do family, the fact that I left Cameroon in 1993 meant that my story was an international story. And to be honest, I even thought that my story could be looked at as an American story because for most of my life, I've lived out of Cameroon, out of Africa, and in the United States and in the Western world. So I thought that this was an international story. It's only when I had to tell it that I realized that nobody, nobody saw my story as an American story, as an international story, and as a Western story. For Americans, my story was an African story. For European, my story was a Cameroonian story. African, my story was a Cameroonian story. And for Cameroonian, my story was a Bamileke story. And for Bamileke people, my story was a family story. It took me a long time to realize that I needed to find a way to make that work for me. It took a long, long, long time because when I was telling my story, I always started with the fact that I left Cameroon. I studied in the United States. I'm an American lawyer, member of the DC bar, of the bar of the District of Columbia in the US. That I've written books. So I felt that this meant that anybody would relate and would understand or would try to understand. And to be truthful, I have never, until the last 4 years, put my disability up front because I was never comfortable with that. And I think that if you had talked to me 5 years ago, I would have told you that disability is something that I need to overcome and that, I don't have to put it uh, um, up front because it makes people embarrassed. It doesn't help me because then I need to talk about it and I was never really comfortable talking about it. I'm getting more and more comfortable to talk about it. So, Miente, the first thing when you're telling a modern African story is to know that you are telling a modern African story and to know that there's no way you can hide it. There's no way you can be viewed as Western enough, international enough, no matter how much money, no matter how much education you're perceived to have. There's no way to hide it. How do you relate? How do you talk about yourself? How do you make people, when you get into trouble, understand your place in the world, understand what you're going through, and understand that something is happening if you're trying to get help? For me, as I keep telling you in this podcast, at issue here was my dad and end of his life. He was over 90. He was um, going through a lot because of his succession, because of his political struggles, because of what his son, who got sentenced to 2 life terms in Cameroon, was going through. So it was very, very messy. And me and I get into that story after my amputation. Um, I've been away from the whole mess my whole life. And I realized there's no way for me to avoid getting involved. Either I stay away and let my die and his life tragically, or either do something, even though it wasn't the right time. It was important for me to help my dad. So the key part, you have to know where to start when you're telling a modern African story. You have to know where to start. It took me a long time, Ian Tate, to accept the fact that even though my story and my dad's story Fotso Victor story. It's an amazing story that that fact doesn't help. African success stories come with a bad smell, with suspicion, with this desire um, that is not always acknowledged, to doubt the story, to find something that is wrong, to look at everything that looks, murky, to basically say that is suspicious. That means that something bad is out there. This is an African thing. When you're telling an African success story, even for Africans, it is suspicious. They're going to look at it like, say, how did he cheat? Is it possible? This is too good to be true. And when it's too good to be true, it can't be true. More often than not, Africans are going to say, no, this can't be right. This is too, something is weird here. There's something wrong with this picture. In Africa, usually we cut corners. We cheat. People are not good. Africans think that African Black people are mean or cruel, that there's something wrong with Africans. We are lazy, we are cheaters, we are violent, we're not disciplined, and we can't get organized. So there's something inherently wrong with African people. So when you tell an African success story, people look at it like, something is wrong, something is wrong, something is wrong. And if you tell an African success story and that you're asking for people to relate, to help you, to give you something, they're going to be like, no. Why should we give you something? If you are that successful, you should give us something. It took me a long time, Miente, to accept that. I was seeing it and I was fighting it. People, when it comes to African success stories, they are not going to help. If you're saying my dad is this African legend who has come from nothing and who now is fighting to basically die tragically, people are going to relate to that. They're going to feel like, oh yeah, but if he made it, why is he struggling now? Why didn't he organize his succession? Why did he have so many wives? Why did he have so many kids? Why did he get into politics? Africans give non-Africans the permission to question African success stories. Let me say it again. Africans give non-Africans the permission, all the excuses to question African story, not to relate, and to basically be brutal when other Africans succeed. So my dad, wealthy guy, amazing story. Me. So people are really gonna say, yeah, but help him. Why do you need us? Why should we give you any help? The others struggling on the continent. Why does this matter? So if you start with this African success story, with the success, people are not gonna really. People are not gonna care. People are gonna find all the excuses, all the justification possible not to see you, not even to listen to you, and to basically say, yeah, but you come from, in Cameroon, people struggle. In Africa, people struggle. If you had all this opportunity, if you had all of this wealth, why didn't you manage it well? Why is your dad struggling? Why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? So no compassion, no way to relate, no help. So you have to find another way. So Miente, for a long time, I felt that, okay, if I start with the end of the story by talking about an African legend who's been abused by his kids, by talking about what many people can relate when they have parents who are getting older, I was certain, mi gente, that people will relate if I talked to them about the fact that my dad was being abused by his kids. I was certain of it. I was certain that it was not only going to make people outraged, not only in Cameroon and in Africa, but in Belgium, in America, with my colleagues, that other attorneys who could help were going to listen to that story and say to themselves, yeah, this is this is an outrage. We can't let this happen. This matters, Let's help. But me and saying, crickets, nothing. Silence. People were questioning what I was saying. People were questioning whether abuse here, because this was an African man, whether it mattered. People were saying, okay, if this is what is happening, maybe he wants it that way. Um, give us a lot of money and we will help. We'll see what we can do. What my dad was going through didn't really move the needle. What, Fotso Victor was going through. And this is not, even questionable. People knew. People knew that the situation was very, very bad, but do anything. Because, it was like, it's too messy, too many kids. So he made his bed. He didn't move the needle. There was this case in France. They made a series in Netflix about Liliane Bettencourt, the woman, the former major shareholder of L'Oréal, who was abused. All the newspapers were talking about Liliane Bettencourt. She was abused. She thought, she was taken advantage of. All types of headlines. Old French woman, about the same age as my father, very, very wealthy woman, that, was getting abused, by this photographer who took almost €1 billion. And people cared. People were outraged. Oh my God, this could be my mother. My God, the guy is taking advantage of this old lady. Her daughter, she had all the presumptions that I didn't have. She's the wealthiest woman in the world. She's the wealthiest woman in the world. I'm not on that level by any stretch. But in France, in Europe, in the Western world, even in Africa, that story, there was some compassion there. The lady didn't have the same background as my dad. It was her dad who made the fortune, the wealth. It was her dad who created L'Oreal. My dad, African guy, wealthy guy, has a lot of wives, comes from nothing, can't read it, but can't write. But nobody cared. With Liliane Bettencourt, people cared. The court cared. They did whatever they could to make sure that she was protected. And I kept asking for the same thing because my dad was in France at the time. He was getting old and he was in France. He was in Paris most of the time for health reasons. People who know a lot about Cameroon know that when you're sick and that you have the means, you go to hospitals in France most of the time. Now people are starting to go to South Africa or to India or wherever else. But people like my dad, they were going to the American hospital, of Paris. So I try. I keep asking for the same treatment as Liliane Bettencourt, thinking there's no reason why my dad shouldn't be treated with the same respect, with the same compassion, and shouldn't be entitled to the same treatment as the French legal system was, affording to Liliane Bettencourt. And nothing happens. So for me, it's hard to accept, Miente. Here, Miente, the storytelling matters. I kept thinking that the fact were speaking for themselves. I kept thinking that just by looking at my dad, just by looking at what was happening, it was so obvious that something is wrong. Even if people disagreed with my characterization of what was happening, it was obvious. Miente, I even had this discussion with somebody who worked for the French embassy in Cameroon, who told me, yeah, we have a problem with your dad inner circle. There's a lot of crooks there. We don't understand how a man like Victor Fotso, can have such an inner circle. So people knew, and yet nothing was done. Nothing was done. And I kept trying to tell the story. I started with a success. I kept, putting that up front. I kept, expecting people to feel some type of compassion by describing what my dad was living. He was over 90 and he was being abused, you know, by his family and by others. And nobody cared. Niente, I went so far as to um, make the French police, go to his apartment in Paris because they had just flown him from Cameroon to Paris and they didn't take him to the hospital. They just took him to his apartment with somebody there to watch him, because they were trying to make him sign some documents. The French police went there. They asked him, he was under the duress and said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "I'm fine." And everything is fine. And kept trying. But nobody wanted to intervene. He didn't feel comfortable and he was like, he's too African, too foreign, too whatever. Nothing. So what did I do, Miente? It's that time that I understood, that I felt that I need to talk about disability more. I said to myself, okay, African success stories are not relatable. An old African legend abused by his inner circle, nobody cares. So I thought, okay, maybe my disability is gonna force people to care, to be more curious. And you know what happened, Niente? Nobody cared. Nobody cared. They were like, yeah, but if you're, okay, you're disabled, so what? Your dad is wealthy. Why should we care about the fact that you're disabled? You're not really disabled because you come from a wealthy family. Your dad is wealthy. If your dad is Victor Fotso and you say that he's an African legend, why should we care about the fact that you're disabled and that you're going through some type of discrimination? Just use your dad money. Why should we care? I remember this colleague from the Brussels bar who said, "Yeah, but your dad is wealthy, and we're not a social service. Why should we care?" And that was the typical response, not only from the Brussels bar, but the DC, the District of Columbia Bar Association, and from all of the people who could have helped me, who could have helped me make a difference. They were like, we are not a social service. The people who say in the 21st century disability matters felt that in my case it didn't matter. African, daughter of a billionaire, and they felt that it didn't matter because they felt that if they cared, that they were giving me an advantage. That just by caring, just by being curious, it was unfair to other Africans, to Africa. That in my case, care or attention or whatever else was not necessary. I was too uppity. I was, arrogant. I was, I remember the social worker from the Brussels bar telling me, "Oh my God, the princess," you know. That was the most heartbreaking thing. By acting as everybody else, I'm a lawyer. I've done my studies in America, English, French, member of the District Bar Association, on the foreign list of the Brussels Bar. I'm acting as any other lawyer would, but for others, I'm being uppity. I should be humble. That social worker says to me, "You don't really belong here. Find another job. If you need help and you're a lawyer, find another job." Belgium has put in its constitution that, the disabled have a right or to, but in my case, people were like, "Yeah, but no, you're wealthy, so you're disabled, so what? You come from a wealthy family. And if you can't really do that, we're not going to help you. Why should we help you?" By doing that, yeah, we are making it's unfair for everybody else. In my case, you know, just caring felt like I was cheating. I was trying to trick people into helping me. There There's also this in some comments in French that you can read on, on most of my videos, where people say, by talking about your disability, you're trying to get people's sympathy, as if in the case of an African woman, sympathy gets you to the top. It gets you so far. It makes people, it makes you money or whatever. That doesn't exist. So, Miante, I tried telling the African success story, crickets. I tried with my dad, abuse I tried with my dad, abuse from his inner circles, crickets. I tried with the disability, my disability, crickets. And what I understood, Miante, is that the only way to start, the only place to start was to take control of the narrative. That is one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. I can't spend the rest of my life writing letters. I'm going to seize the narrative. I'm going to make this an act of self-empowerment. Seize the narrative and keep telling it until I force people to listen to me. So, Miente, yes. How do you tell a modern African story? You stop waiting for people to listen. You seize the microphone and say, I'm going to tell you the story and you're going to have to listen to me. I'm going to keep telling it in English, in French, until you listen to me, until you're so sick of me yapping about my father, about my struggles, that you say, okay, I'm going to be curious and just, what is this woman talking about? Let me Google it. When she talks about what happened to her, at the Brussels Bar Association, what is all of this about? Let me ask a Belgian lawyer that I know. Let me just do something that's going to take 5 minutes of my time and do whatever I can do. Let me see. Let me read one of her books. Let me Google her dad. Let me just do something. By just, guys, being curious, by just inquiring to whoever you can, whoever you know, in Brussels, in Spain, wherever, by asking the Cameroonian authorities questions here matter. And that's the only way you tell a modern African story. You stop being passive, Miente. I was being too passive, and I felt that I needed them to pay attention to me. And I waited for them to be passively, to pay attention to me, to listen to me. And then I said, you know what? No, I'm going to seize the mic. I'm going to get myself a mic and start yapping and start talking about it. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be uncomfortable for me, but I'm going to get better at it. And eventually, Miente, they're going to listen to me. And at least they're going to say to me, this is wrong. This is not what happened. You're wrong here. This is not what happened. This is the answer to your question. You are wrong. We looked at it. You are making this up. This is not what happened. The law doesn't say this. Nothing unlawful happened here. It may be tragic, it may be sad, but nothing unlawful happened here. Nothing immoral happened here. What I'm saying, Miente, something scandalous happened to Fotso Victor and to me, Christelle Nadia Fotso. Something scandalous. And the only reason why you are not outraged is because you don't know the story. And if you know the story, if you get over the appearance, the gimmicks, the fluff, the noise, and basically just learn about the story, you will feel outraged. You will be outraged. If you get over that smell, that suspicion that my dad basically cheated to become wealthy at some point, Africa needs to get over the need to have perfect Africans. Africans, whether they're successful or not, only have to be human. They don't have to be perfect. Africans are allowed to have their flaws, and they are allowed to have their own tradition. Did I agree with the fact that did I agree with my dad on everything? No. I was very modern. He was very traditional. He had many wives. And my dad, although he had many wives, he was a feminist when he came to me. He was a feminist when he came to me. I'm not sure that he was the most tolerant person, but when he came to his disabled daughter, he was the most tolerant person in the world. So, mi gente, the only way to tell a modern African story is first to accept. You can fight it however you want. You can fight hard. You can say, no, this is not a modern African story. This is a human story. This is an international story. This is the American story. This is a transcendent story. But at the end, you're going to realize, no, it's an African story. So first you have to acknowledge it and to accept it. The only way to tell it, you accept it, and then you turn up the volume. I started by saying, yeah, guys, listen to me. Yeah, guys, can you help me? Yeah, guys, let me tell you my story. Yeah, guys, this is what happened. This is, my dad. This is what happened to me and everything else. People were like, yeah, but why? No. And then, you know what I did? I bought myself a mic. And I said, I'm doing the podcast in English and in French. And I'm going to yap until people start to feel the heat and have to answer some questions. Niente. It doesn't have to be 100 people. If I only get 2 of you, even 5, to just be curious and to ask questions, to basically say, if this story is true, it's unacceptable. And we want to know what happened. Is she right? And why it happened, and why nobody is talking about it. So, Miante, yeah, that's the reason of the podcast. I'm telling a modern African story, and I realized the only way to do it, especially if you're a writer and a lawyer, is to do a podcast, is to do it yourself, not to wait for others to believe, to see it. You do it yourself, and then whatever happens, happens. My bet, Miante, is that if I do this well enough, then you're going to be curious. Something is going to happen. And then people are going to have to start looking at what happened to an African legend and to his disabled daughter. That's my bet. And I'm putting, Miante, all my chips on the table. I'm betting that I can make some of you care. And some of you ask questions. There is no way that the world is not going to find out about what was possible in 2020 to happen to a great man in the American hospital of Paris, and what happened to his daughter who wasn't in Cameroon just because she was disabled, and that people felt that it didn't matter, that she was too weak to even defend herself. So, Miante, yes. Let me know what you thought of this episode. You can write to me. You can write to me at contact@fotso.org. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel. See you next week, but tomorrow en français. On reste ensemble.